Hi everyone, this is Marie, and I wanted to talk about molds for soap making. And what can you use for molds, and how do you know how big a mold you need for the batch of soap that you're making. So molds, you can use a whole lot of different things for molds. One of the standard ones are wood molds like these. This is a loaf mold, and this is really easy to make. I made this myself, so I mean, how hard can it be? And this is lined, and I will talk about lining in a minute. So you can use this type of mold. You can use other type of, whatever you have on hand really. This is another wood mold, but this is a drawer from IKEA. They used to have a little chest of drawers, and this is one of the drawers. And they had different sizes, so it's great. Makes different sizes of soaps. You can use cardboard box. This is a fancy box, but you know, anything that's sturdy enough will work. You can use plastic, Tupperware, or rigid plastic. This is this is actually for drywalling, and it's you know, it's a nice, funny shaped soaps. Now, if you're using plastic, if you're using anything, first of all, you have to make sure that it's rigid enough to hold your soap. But also, if you're using plastic, you want to make sure it's not going to melt, because soap, once it's poured in the mold, if it gels, it's going to get very hot. And if you're using some flimsy plastic, it could melt. So that's not a good thing. So if you're using plastic, if it says dishwasher safe on it, then that's a good indication that it's fine to use, because it's going to be sturdy enough, it won't melt. But if it doesn't say, you can test it. You can take your container, put it in the sink, then fill it with boiling water, and let it sit for a while and just watch it. If after 5-10 minutes it's still as hard as it was before, if it hasn't softened, if it hasn't melted, or if it hasn't distorted even, then you know it's going to be fine to use for soap making. So that's plastic. You can also use the old PVC pipe. This one, I've got the stopper on the end, and usually when I make soap, I take the stopper off. I put some saran wrap on the end, and I put the stopper back on. So it kind of makes it nice and tight, a tight seal, so that I know my soap isn't going to leak out. You can use silicone molds. So there's individual silicone molds. You've got another type here. This is a bigger type, and these are soap molds. And I've got even these ones, which are like a loaf mold. These are all fun to use, and this is fun because these, you don't have to line them. With rigid molds, you need to line your molds to make it easier for the soap to get out the mold, because if you've ever tried to get soap out of a plastic or hard rigid container, good luck. You'll have to destroy your container to get them out. But with these, they're soft enough that you can just peel the soap away from the side. You can just even invert it, and your soap will come out quite easily. The only thing, though, is that this isn't very rigid, though. These ones are fine because they're kind of, contained within a bigger sleeve of silicone. But something like this, when you pour your soap into here, the weight of the soap will distort the sides a bit, and when you try to carry it, your soap will weigh down the bottom, and your sides will buckle, and your soap will spill. And don't ask me how I know this, because, well, yes, it's happened to me. So with these, what I do is I get myself a rigid container, and I put my mold in there. And if your mold doesn't touch the bottom, you can put something on the bottom of it. Put your mold in there, and now you know it's going to be supported, and it'll be easy to carry it, because you can carry the box rather than trying to do this. And I've done that with these molds as well. Although these are a little bit more rigid because they've got supports on the sides, but they do expand a little bit. So I like to put them in my box, pour them, and away you go. You can use individual molds as well. We've got these little guys. These are silicone as well. And I like these because they came with the little plastic sleeve, so I keep it in there, so that gives it a little bit of support. So if you like to make individual soaps like this, you can use these type of molds. Again, these are silicone, so you don't need to line them. If you're wanting to either gel your soap or not gel your soap, if you want to make sure that your soaps gel, the best way is to use a loaf type mold, one that will contain a large volume of soap together, rather than an individual soap mold like this. When you pour your soap into the mold, when it gels, it gets very, very, very hot. And a bigger mold will hold the heat in a lot better, and it will allow the gel to spread from the center where it starts outwards and get the whole soap gelled rather than having just a partial gel. If you're using individual molds like these guys, they don't hold the heat in as much, so they may not gel. They may or they may not. And if you don't want your soap to gel at all, well then, you know, it's better to use small molds because you've got a better chance of stopping the gel process. So when I make my goat's milk soap, I put it in here, small individual molds, and then I put this in the fridge as well. And I know for sure that my soaps won't gel. If I were to use this, even if I put it in the fridge or the freezer, you never know, you can get a partial gel in the middle, and that's not very attractive. Now for experienced soapers, you know what gel means, but for the new people, gelling means it's a stage that the soap goes through. It doesn't have to go through it. It's a purely aesthetic thing, but depending on the temperature inside the soap, if it gels, it will look like a change. When you look at it after an hour or two out when it's been poured in the mold, you'll notice that if it's gelled, it's gone darker in color and it's gone almost translucent. And the first time I saw that, I thought, oh, what's happening to my soap? But then as it hardens and cools and hardens, it just goes back to what it was before, almost. Not quite. Soap that doesn't gel is fine to use as well. And like I said, my goat's milk soap I don't like to gel because anything that contains sugar, whether it be in milk or honey or anything like that, with the temperature, with the gelling process, it tends to turn it brown. So that's not pretty. But if you want to look at these are two soaps. I don't know if you can see them fairly well, but these are two soaps, same batch. This I made in the Pvc pipe. This one was in the little individual mold. And I did not put this in the fridge, by the way, either. This did not gel. This one did. And you can see this is a little bit darker in color than that one. And this is a little bit more opaque. This has got a little bit of a see-through appearance. I mean, it's not see-through, but it's translucent. So this is your difference between gel and ungelled. And I've been told, I've never tried to measure this, but I've been told that the gelled soap lasts a little bit longer. I don't know if that's true or not. I have noticed that gelled soap sets up a little bit faster and you can unmold it faster. I took this one out of the mold after 24 hours, as I did this one, but this I could tell was still quite a bit sticky on the sides and could have probably stayed in the mold for a little bit longer. And it makes sense because when your soap gels, it's hotter. The reactions, the saponification happens more quickly, and therefore it will set more quickly. So it's all a matter of chemistry and physics. Right. Okay, so now let's see. If you're making soap, especially if you're new at this, and you've got your nice batch of soap and you're ready to pour it into your mold, and all of a sudden, kaboom, you've poured, your mold is full and you still have soap left over. What do? Well, I always keep extra on hand, like an extra mold ready, so that I can pour the overflow into here. But if you don't want to do that, then there's a good, easy way to find out how much your mold will hold before you make your soap, and then you can tailor your soap recipe to fit the mold. Now, how you do this is if you have something that's square or rectangular in this case, all you have to do is you measure the length and you multiply that by the width and the height, or the depth of your mold. If you want your soap to come right up to the top, then you measure from the bottom to the top. If you want just a partial fillet, because you want to do some fancy tops or peaks or whatnot, then you just measure up to where you want your soap to be. So you take this measurement in inches times that measurement in inches, times the height or the depth in inches, and then you get a number. Then you take that number and you multiply it by 0.4. It's always that same constant, 0.4, and that gives you the amount of ounces of oil that you need for your soap recipe. So when I measured this mold, I came out with a number. I measured this times that times the depth, came out with a number. I multiplied it by 0.4 and I came out with 60. So 60 ounces of oil. If I make a recipe with that, I know it will fit in this mold. And that includes the weight of the water, the weight of the lye that you're putting in. That's all included in that. And once you've got it figured out, mark it on your mold. Because if you're like me, you have a lot of molds, you tend to forget what's what. So I've done that. This one I've marked it as well on here. So this is 48 ounces, 60 ounces and whatnot. And you know exactly how much soap you need to make for your mold. But what if you get something like this, right? Or what if you get something like this old thing again? Now what do you do? Well, you can do different things. You can do the long, hard way by measuring the circumference of your pipe. So that's pi r squared, if you remember your high school geometry, times the height. Well, that's fine, but who's going to do that? Not me. And then what if you get something like that that is totally not right? I mean, it's angled this way, angled that way, and every which way. Well, the easiest way to do it is you fill this with water up to the level that you want you would want your soap to get up to. And then you can either measure the volume in water in mils and then convert that into cubic centimeters and convert that into cubic inches. You can that way, or you can take the water in here, get a mold that's square or rectangular, dump the water in there, and then just measure the height of the water times the length and the width. And again, times 0.4, and then you've got your volume for this. Same with the pipe. Dump it in there and just measure this. So that's how you do that. Some people like to line their molds, and actually, as I mentioned earlier, anything that's rigid and that you can't take apart needs to be lined. Some people will grease the mold instead. I'm not crazy about that. I just don't like putting extra grease. Like some people use Vaseline. I don't like to have that on my soap. You could use an oil that's already in your soap recipe. Like if you're putting olive oil in your soap, then you could grease your mold with olive oil. But I don't like my molds being greasy. I don't like the top of my soap being greasy, so I use freezer paper. You can use butcher paper, you can use wax paper, you can even line your molds with garbage bags, actually, like a strong plastic. I prefer the paper because it's smoother. With the plastic you get all ridges and wrinkles and whatnot. And if you don't mind your soap to have those wrinkles, well, that's fine. But I prefer the paper. So that's it about molds. In another video, I'll show you actually how to line the molds. It's quite easy once you know how, and there's different methods of doing it as well. But thanks for watching.